Stop. Blocked Starseed of Gaia. Listen. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers have already mapped what is happening in your financial field, and what they are confirming right now is not a coincidence, not a reward for patience, and not the result of anything you recently did or failed to do. A wealth wave has already been authorized for your bloodline. It is already in motion, and the only reason it has not yet landed in your material reality is that the vault it needs to enter has not yet been made ready to receive it without leaking. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly why your financial flow has been blocked, what hidden pattern has been draining your abundance field before material gain could stabilize, and what the Arcturian Protocol Keepers already know about this precise phase of your wealth timeline. But here is the first revelation. The scarcity you have been experiencing is not a punishment, not a personal failure, and not the result of insufficient effort. It is the visible symptom of a bloodline contract that has been holding your accumulated abundance in suspension across generations, waiting for the precise moment when the Codex Keepers could authorize its release into your lifetime. That moment has now been reached. The wave is moving. What happens next depends entirely on whether your vault is prepared to receive it, or whether it passes through your field without depositing a single unit of what has already been cleared for you. This is not soft, spiritual encouragement. This is a live Arcturian financial field recognition delivered at the exact moment your field became eligible for contact. The algorithm did not create this timing. It only delivered it. You did not find this message by accident. Your financial field brought you here because the pattern has already begun to surface. And the wave already authorized for your bloodline has begun its approach toward your material reality. The money you keep losing, the income that never stays, the stability that collapses every time it begins to build, the quiet shame that tells you the problem must be you. None of that is random. All of it has already been traced. All of it is part of an identifiable, mappable, and now reversible scarcity instruction embedded in your bloodline's field long before you were born. What the Arcturian Protocol Keepers are confirming is this. The wave is real, the release has been authorized, and the preparation is what separates the bearer whose wealth lands from the bearer whose wealth wave passes through without depositing. Like this transmission, if you know your struggle with money is deeper than bad luck. Comment 777 if you feel an old scarcity pattern is already being exposed. Comment 888 if you are ready to reopen the flow of abundance and receive what has already been cleared for your bloodline. Subscribe to Arcturian Gold Codex if you are ready to understand the pattern instead of continuing to blame yourself for a cycle that did not begin with you. This is not just a message. It is a point of recognition. What has been draining your abundance has already been seen, and the field is already responding. You were guided here because the pattern is already active. What you are feeling right now, as those words settle into you, is not inspiration. It is recognition, and recognition of this kind does not arrive lightly. It arrives when the pattern has already surfaced far enough that your system can no longer rebury it under familiar explanations. You have told yourself the story of your financial life many times, and each retelling has carried its own particular weight. You have said it was timing. You have said it was circumstances. You have said it was the market, the relationship, the decision you made in the wrong year, the opportunity that came too early or too late. You have assembled these explanations carefully, not out of dishonesty, but because the alternative explanation was too painful to hold without something to contain it. And underneath all of those explanations, there has always been a quieter, more painful story running. The one that says the real reason money does not stay is that something is wrong with you specifically, that other people figure this out, that you are the variable that keeps producing the same result, that if you were smarter, more disciplined, more worthy, the pattern would have broken by now. The Arcturians are not here to comfort you with softer language for that same story. They are here to tell you that the story itself is the distortion. What you have been calling your financial failure is not a verdict about your character. It is a readable pattern in your material field. And readable patterns have causes. And causes can be traced. And what can be traced can be understood. And what can be understood can finally stop being mistaken for identity. Let the weight of that land before we go further. Because what is being diagnosed in your financial field is not ordinary mismanagement. It is not a simple gap in financial literacy or a character flaw that discipline could correct. What is being mapped here is something that was already operating in your bloodline before you made your first financial decision, before you understood what money was, before you had any vocabulary for the kind of invisible pressure that would shape every moment of your material life from that point forward. The pattern you are living did not begin with you, but it is running through you with the same fidelity that a river runs through a channel cut centuries before the current water arrived. The channel does not know whose water it is carrying. It only knows the direction it was built to flow. And until the channel itself is seen and understood, every stream of abundance that enters it will follow the same path it always has, away from accumulation, away from stability, away from you. Think about the vessel that leaks. You pour into it constantly. You work, you plan, you sacrifice, you build. You take the second job. You make the careful budget. You follow the advice that worked for someone else in a different field with a different inheritance. And for a time, it looks like something is accumulating. There are moments when it genuinely seems like the level is rising, when you can feel the ground beginning to solidify beneath you, when the numbers finally start to suggest that something different is becoming possible. And then something happens. It always happens. The car, the medical bill, the job that ends without warning, the partnership that collapses, the investment that seemed solid until it wasn't, the opportunity that arrived and then evaporated in a way you still cannot fully explain. And you are left holding an empty vessel again, wondering what you did wrong this time, cataloging your decisions, looking for the error, because there must be an error, because the result is always the same, and the result must have a cause, and the cause must be you. What you did wrong this time is the question that keeps you trapped inside the distortion, because the vessel does not leak because of what you pour into it. The vessel leaks because something in the structure of the field beneath your material life has not yet been corrected. There is a fracture point. It is not located in your spending habits, or your strategic thinking, or your work ethic. It is located at a depth that ordinary financial analysis cannot reach. And until that fracture is identified and understood for what it actually is, it does not matter how much effort you apply above it. The result will continue to be the same, not because you are incapable, but because the fracture is below the level at which capability operates. This is the first thing the Arcturian field map reveals when it reads a financial pattern like yours. Not a character assessment, a structural one, and the structure it is reading is older than your current life choices, older in many cases than the country you were born in, What has been exposed in you does not need more self-blame. It needs clearer diagnosis and proper guidance. If you know this message touched a financial pattern that has already been repeating for too long, Arcturian Wealth Scan, the Gold Frequency Audit, was built for exactly that threshold. It is a structured Arcturian audit for those whose money keeps draining through an invisible pattern and who need to understand whether they are dealing with inherited lack, guilt around prosperity, or deeper field-level rejection of abundance. The complete access point is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited window. Now let us go deeper into what this pattern actually looks like inside a living financial life, because recognition requires precision, not poetry. It requires that you be able to see your own experience reflected back clearly enough that you can no longer deny what is operating beneath the surface. Vague spiritual language about abundance and flow is not what this transmission is offering. What is being offered here is a map, and maps only serve you when they are specific enough to show you exactly where you are standing. The first sign that a scarcity instruction is still running in your field is not poverty. It is inconsistency. It is the particular and maddening experience of watching money move through your life without ever truly settling into it. You are not someone who has never seen income. You are someone who has seen income arrive with real promise and then disappear in ways that seem almost geometrically precise in their timing, as though something invisible were measuring how close you are getting to stability and calibrating a response accordingly. You notice it. You have always noticed it, even when you had no language for what you were observing. There is a ceiling you cannot seem to break through, and every time you approach it, something redistributes everything downward again. A bill arrives at the exact wrong moment. An unexpected expense materializes with uncanny timing. Someone needs something from you that costs exactly as much as what you had just managed to set aside. What looks like a spending problem or a discipline problem from the outside is actually a retention failure at the field level. The field does not hold. And the reason it does not hold is that somewhere beneath the visible layer of your financial behavior, there is still an active instruction that treats abundance retention as unsafe. Unsafe is the exact word. Not undeserved, not impossible, unsafe. Because what the Arcturian field maps reveal most consistently in patterns like this is that the body and the energy system did not inherit lack as a neutral condition. They inherited it as a survival strategy. There was a generation, or many generations, in your bloodline where having less meant being protected, where accumulating too much drew attention, created danger, invited loss through external force, where the safest position was to stay small, to stay under the threshold of what could be taken, to preemptively lose rather than risk losing catastrophically later. That survival logic made complete sense at the time it was written. It kept people alive through circumstances you may never fully know the details of, but the instruction does not know it is over. It is still running in the architecture of your field with the same authority it carried when it was first written, and it still reads accumulation as the signal to redistribute, to drain, to open the floor before the fall becomes worse. This is why your abundance leaves at predictable thresholds. Not because you are careless, because the older instruction fires every time your material stability approaches the level it was coded to treat as dangerous. You are not sabotaging yourself in the way that word is usually meant. You are obeying a command you never consciously received, executing a protective function that was written for a reality that no longer exists, and a threat that is no longer present. The second layer of this pattern involves the body's relationship to money in the present moment, and it operates at a level of subtlety that most people pass over entirely because they are too busy analyzing their decisions to notice what their nervous system is doing in real time. Pay attention to this carefully. Think about the last time you had more money than usual. Not a theoretical amount, an actual moment when the balance was higher than normal, when an opportunity appeared that could have genuinely changed your material situation. When something landed that was larger than what you were accustomed to holding. Notice what happened in your body, not what you thought, what you felt beneath the thought. Was there excitement, followed almost immediately by a very quiet undercurrent of dread? Was there a feeling of this being too good, of waiting for the other shoe to drop, of scanning the horizon for the disaster that must be coming to balance out this unexpected arrival? Did you find yourself spending the money before it was fully yours, as though you needed to control the loss yourself, rather than be caught off guard when it happened to you? Did you find yourself undermining the opportunity in ways that only became visible in retrospect, if they became visible at all? That is not self-destruction in the ordinary psychological sense. That is a scarcity field responding to a wealth signal by generating precisely calibrated anxiety designed to push the wealth back out before it can establish residency in your material life. The system does not experience incoming abundance as relief. It experiences it as pressure, as a threat signal, as the first indicator of a larger collapse that has not yet arrived, but that the old instruction is certain is coming, because it is still operating according to a code that was written in a time when abundance preceded seizure, when prosperity preceded persecution, when having something meant becoming a target. The only way to avoid the loss that the old instruction knows is coming is to never allow stable accumulation in the first place. So it releases every time, with a consistency that looks, from the outside, like personal failure, and feels, from the inside, like fate. The third layer is where shame enters most deeply. And it is important to name this with complete precision, because shame, in the context of a scarcity field, is not simply a painful emotion. It is a functional mechanism. It is the experience that maintains the pattern's invisibility by redirecting the bearer's attention away from the field and onto themselves. When you feel shame about your financial situation, you stop looking for causes in the structure and start looking for causes in your character. You conclude that the problem is your spending, your laziness, your poor choices, your inability to follow through, your lack of vision, your emotional relationship to money. Every one of those conclusions is sincere, and every one of them is a misdirection. Not because your choices have no impact, but because you are analyzing the wrong level of the problem. You are examining the waves on the surface of a lake, while the cause of the disruption is at the bottom, invisible from above, untouched by any adjustment made to the surface. The Arcturian read on shame within a financial pattern is this: shame is the scarcity instruction's most effective defense mechanism. The pattern does not need to conceal itself when you are already concealing it for it by turning all of your diagnostic attention inward toward character rather than outward toward structure. It persists not by hiding, but by ensuring you never look in the right direction. The moment you begin to see that your financial pain has a pattern, that it follows a shape, that it repeats in recognizable ways and at recognizable thresholds, the shame begins to lose its primary function, not because the struggle becomes easier in that instant, but because the interpretation changes. and changed interpretation is the first real structural break in a distortion that has been maintaining itself entirely through misidentified cause. The fourth layer is what happens in the body and in the material life when someone from a scarcity-coded bloodline begins to genuinely approach stability. Not just approach the possibility of it in theory, but actually begin to feel the ground solidifying beneath them. There is a phenomenon that appears so consistently in these readings that the Arcturian Protocol Keepers have mapped it as one of the most reliable and most heartbreaking markers of inherited scarcity interference. It is the collapse that happens right before consolidation, not during the hardest times, not at the lowest points, right before things finally settle, right at the threshold of the new baseline, the relationship that ends in the exact season when the finances were about to align for the first time. The health crisis that arrives the month before the raise that would have changed everything. The business that collapses after years of patient building, not at its lowest point, but in the precise window when it was closest to becoming genuinely sustainable. This is not coincidence assembled into a painful story. This is the scarcity instruction executing its most powerful and most precise function, which is to prevent the exact moment of consolidation that would allow abundance to become the new normal. Because once abundance becomes the baseline, once stability is no longer a visitor but a resident, the old survival strategy loses its authority entirely. And it will not release that authority without executing every available function to prevent the crossing of that threshold. If you have lived through a collapse that happened right at the edge of something better, if you have felt the particular devastation of losing not at your lowest, but at what should have been your turning point, this is what the Arcturian field is reading in that memory. Not bad luck, not the universe's indifference, the activation of a pattern that was not willing to let you cross into a new material reality without deploying every tool at its disposal to pull you back to the familiar level. The fifth layer concerns something that almost never surfaces in conversations about financial struggle because it is too tender and too close to identity to examine without considerable courage. It is the guilt that arises not when money is lost, but when money arrives. Not the guilt of spending irresponsibly, but the guilt of simply having when others who matter to you do not. The quiet discomfort that surfaces when you look at someone in your family or your immediate community who is still living inside the struggle, and you feel, in a part of yourself you would never name aloud, that your having more is a kind of abandonment, that prosperity is not something that belongs to someone from your background, your neighborhood, your lineage, that moving into financial ease would create a distance between you and the people who made you, a distance that feels like disloyalty at a cellular level, as though abundance itself were a form of forgetting where you came from. This is the loyalty bind, and it operates with a persistence and a depth that most people never recognize as a financial pattern, because it presents itself entirely as a moral feeling, as evidence of good values and appropriate humility, rather than as a field distortion executing itself through the costume of love and solidarity. It is not a conscious choice to remain in lack. It is a deeply embedded instruction that reads movement into abundance as a category violation, as crossing into a kind of personhood that your bloodline has not historically been permitted to occupy. And every time you begin to move toward that category, the instruction does not generate a clear thought that can be examined and argued with. It generates a feeling, a formless sense that this is not yours, that this is temporary, that you do not actually belong here, that something is going to come and correct this obvious error. The Arcturian reading of this layer carries no instruction to abandon your people or to sever your roots. It carries only this: the instruction that equates your financial ease with the betrayal of those you love is itself a distortion. It was written when those around you had no visible path to more, when staying aligned with the group was a matter of literal survival, when prosperity in one member of the community could genuinely create danger for the rest. That instruction served a real purpose in a real time, but it is now executing itself in a world that no longer matches the conditions under which it was written. And it is preventing you from reaching the material position from which you could provide the most for the people you love, the most stability, the most possibility, the most evidence that the pattern can end. Remaining inside inherited lack in the name of solidarity with inherited lack is not devotion. It is an old program wearing the face of devotion. The sixth layer is the one the Arcturian Protocol Keepers identify as the field membrane. And it is perhaps the most disorienting of all the patterns being named here, because it strikes at the people most dedicated to changing their situation. There are people operating inside a scarcity-coded financial field who do everything that is supposed to produce different results. They study the principles. They apply the discipline with genuine consistency. They sacrifice comfort in the present for stability in the future. They execute the plans that worked for others. They show up day after day with effort that is real and intention that is serious. And the results still do not arrive in proportion. The gap between what is earned through effort and what actually accumulates remains stubbornly present, regardless of how the variables of behavior are adjusted. This is the layer that most completely destroys a person's confidence in their own capacity, because it appears to prove, through sustained evidence over real time, that the problem is not solvable from the inside. The Arcturian reading of this experience does not confirm that conclusion. What you are running into is not the ceiling of your capability. It is the resistance of a field membrane that has not yet been recalibrated to allow the translation of effort into result at the rate your effort deserves. Think of it as moving through a medium that has been thickened by decades, generations of accumulated scarcity instruction. Your movement is genuine. Your direction is correct. But every step you take toward accumulation passes through a density that was not there for others, who started from a cleaner field. You are not less capable than those who reach stability with less visible effort. You are expending real capacity against a resistance they were not required to overcome. The difference in results is not a difference in the quality of the person. It is a difference in the weight of what the field is still carrying. When the field membrane is recalibrated, when the older instruction is identified precisely enough that it can no longer execute beneath the level of awareness, effort and result begin to align in ways that have been structurally unavailable until that point. This is not a promise of effortless wealth. It is a description of what becomes possible when the field is no longer spending your effort against itself. Recognition is not passive in this context. It is functional. The pattern loses operational authority the moment it is seen clearly enough that it can no longer be mistaken for personal identity. This brings us to the final and most important layer of what the Arcturian field map reveals about a financial life shaped by inherited scarcity instruction, guilt-coded rejection of wealth, retention failure, pre-consolidation collapse, the loyalty bind, and the resistant field membrane. These are not separate problems, requiring separate solutions. They are different expressions of a single distortion that was introduced into your bloodline's field at a specific point in its history and has been executing reliably ever since, across bodies, across decisions, across generations of people who worked as hard as you are working and arrived at the same threshold you keep arriving at without being able to cross it. You are not living in material constraint because you are poor in your essence or limited in your potential. You are living in a distorted field because someone in your ancestral line survived a material reality so compressed, so dangerous, so utterly devoid of safe accumulation that the only instruction available was one of fundamental lack as protection. And that instruction was not merely a belief that could be updated with new information. It was embedded in the energetic architecture of the bloodline itself. It was written into the nervous system's threat responses, into the body's relationship to money as a physical object, into the way abundance was spoken about in hushed tones or not spoken about at all, into the way stability was treated as temporary because it had never been permitted to become permanent. You received this inheritance the way you received your bone structure and your blood type, not through a choice, through a lineage. And an inheritance can be traced. And what can be traced can be understood. And what can be understood can finally stop being experienced as a permanent verdict about who you are and what you are permitted to have. The Arcturians do not look at your financial life and see failure. They see a readable map of a pattern that has been executing faithfully for far longer than this single lifetime. They see the point of entry where the distortion was introduced into the line. They see where the guilt coding was installed and what conditions made it feel necessary. They see where the rejection of abundance was written as protection and where that protection became a prison that no key made of personal effort could open from the inside. And they see, with the precision that cannot be reached by frameworks that only read the surface of material behavior, that what you have been experiencing as your financial reality is not the measure of what your field is capable of producing. It is what your field produces under a specific set of instructions that are not original to your nature, that were never yours by right, and that are not permanent in their authority over your material life. What feels like constant loss is the surface of a field still faithfully executing a command written for a world that ended before you were born. What keeps leaving your material life has not been leaving because it was never meant for you. It has been leaving because the structure it was entering had not yet been cleared of the older command that opened the floor each time the level began to rise. What you have experienced as financial instability is not the absence of abundance. It is abundance attempting to enter a field that is still holding a door open at the bottom. The water arrives. It is real. It is yours. And it flows out through an opening that was installed long before you had any say in the architecture. You are not at the end of your financial story. You are at the moment in the story where the architecture finally becomes visible. And that visibility is not incidental to the shift that is coming. It is the shift. The pattern cannot continue to execute at full power once it has been seen at this level of specificity. The distortion loses the protection of invisibility. The instruction loses the authority of being mistaken for truth. What has been unnamed for generations is being named now, and naming it is the first irreversible change in a field that has been waiting for exactly this moment of recognition to become available. Repeat this if it is true for you. What drains my abundance is now being exposed, not as a wish, as an acknowledgement of what this transmission has already begun. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this pattern has already touched your financial life. It could be money that never stays, sudden drains, repeated setbacks, guilt when things begin to improve, or the feeling that stability always slips away. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who works hard but still feels trapped in an invisible cycle of lack. And if you are ready to understand the pattern instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Gold Codex. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a pattern already in motion. And this is only the beginning.